Hello and welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm John Bachman. Joining me right now on the phone is John Lott Jr. He's an economist and gun rights advocate. Thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
All right, real quick, we want to take a look at this new package of gun restrictions coming out of Connecticut, out of the Connecticut State Legislature. Lawmakers want to limit magazine capacity to 10 rounds. People who already own these magazines would have to register them with police. Background checks would be required for the purchase of assault weapons. And Connecticut would also become the first state to create a dangerous weapon offender registry. Connecticut's governor says he likes the proposal, says it closes a lot of loopholes. What's your take?
Well, my take is that the registration licensing fees that they have, for example, are going to make it much more costly for people to own guns. And unfortunately, the people that it's going to affect the most are going to be relatively low-income people who live in high-crime urban areas. The people who are most likely to be victims of violent crime are going to be priced out of being able to afford guns for self-defense. And I'm sure as Connecticut, as we've seen in Maryland and Colorado and other places, Democrats are going to vote very strongly against exempting poor people from, having to pay those taxes. Sorry.
No problem. There was a lot of talk immediately after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, talking about a supposed rush to enact new legislation here. I want to focus on something specific that Connecticut Governor Daniel Malloy said. He took things a little bit further today in a news conference, and I'm quoting him here. Quote, if Mrs. Lanza, the mother of the shooting, the man accused of shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary, had not been able to purchase guns like the ones of which she purchased, then Mr. Lanza, Adam, would not have been able to kill as many people as he did. I wanted to get your take on the governor's comments today.
Nonsense. I mean, they want to go after guns based on how they look. They have a long list of guns by name that they list there. And, it's similar to what Feinstein had. She had 108 pages of guns that she listed by name. The very fact that you have to list guns by name shows how arbitrary these rules are. Look, if they want to go and ban all semi-automatic guns, they should talk about banning all semi-automatic guns. They shouldn't ban some semi-automatic guns based on how they look. People talk about military weapons, assault weapons, and what have you, and none of these are machine guns that they're talking about. All the guns used in these types of attacks have been semi-automatic guns. But the basic semi-automatics, one bullet comes out per pull the trigger, but that's the same for all semi-automatic guns. And I don't think they believe they can get a law passed that would ban all semi-automatic guns because people know the benefits for self-defense from having a gun that's semi-automatic. That means one pull the trigger, the gun reloads, one pull the trigger, the gun reloads. The alternative would be something like a bolt-action rifle, where you have to manually go and load the bullet into the chamber each time, and that takes a lot of time. And when you're facing multiple criminal attackers, people don't have time. So they don't want to make that claim. Instead, they make it sound like these are military weapons or somehow different than anything else. The AR-15 that was used in Connecticut is functionally identical to any semi-automatic hunting rifle. Fires the same bullets with the same rapidity, doing the same damage. And, Connecticut already had an assault weapons ban, so they're adding more guns to the list. It's not going to make any difference. It's just too bad that there's so much theatrics here rather than talking about the actual specifics of guns in kind of a useful way.
Yeah, and that was what some people pointed to as a big problem with the assault weapons ban that was enacted in the 1990s. On the other hand, we also have this report just released by the NRA calling for more security at schools, specifically armed guards who have completed intensive training classes. What do you think about the new NRA report, the new suggestions? Do we need more armed guards at schools?
Well, this is something I go through a fair amount in my new book, At the Brink, but it's just, look, there are limits to what you can do with uniformed armed guards. If a terrorist or one of these killers attack a place, they have certain strategic advantages. One of the advantages is they decide who to go after first. And if you have a uniformed armed guard, they're likely to be the first person that you go after. And then you go after the other victims that are there. And plus, it's costly to put armed guards in all the schools. If it were me, I would do what we allow in 5 states now and what we used to allow in a lot of states, including Connecticut. Up until 1995, Connecticut was one of the right-to-carry states that allowed people to carry guns on school property, whether you were an administrator or staff or teacher or whether you were a parent who was visiting. You would have been allowed, if you had gone through the proper channels and gotten your concealed handgun permit, to carry it on school property. I can't find, and no teachers' unions group that I've debated has been able to point to one single example of a problem that occurred either back then or now in the states that have allowed these types of things. Instead, here's the way to think about this, and that is, God forbid, let's say a violent criminal was stalking you or your family. Would you feel safer putting a sign up in front of your home that said your home was a gun-free zone? I don't know anybody who would do that. And even when I debate gun control advocates, none of them say that they would do that. And the problem is, even though nobody would do that for obvious reasons, because you'd actually be encouraging the criminal to attack, it'd be a magnet for him to attack your home, somehow we want to put up these signs in front of areas which are the most vulnerable places in our society. And rather than making them safer, what I've tried to argue in my books is that it actually serves as a magnet for these attacks. I mean, it's hard to get over the fact that with just 2 exceptions, all the multiple victim public shootings in the United States since at least 1950 have occurred in places where guns are banned. All the attacks in Europe, which has about the same rate as we have in the United States, have all occurred where guns are banned. You look at something like the Colorado shooting from last summer for the Batman movie theater attack. You had 7 movie theaters within a 20-minute drive to the killer's apartment. Only one had signs posted banning permanently concealed handguns. The killer didn't go to the movie theater that was closest to his home. He didn't go to the movie theater that advertised itself as having the largest auditoriums in the state of Colorado, which you think would be an attractive target for somebody on premiere night for a movie theater. Instead, he went to the only place where victims weren't allowed to defend themselves. And that's what you see happen time after time after time. These killers try to take places where they know victims aren't going to be able to defend themselves, because then they can go and kill more people and injure more people than they could otherwise.
And it would be interesting to see if that comes up in the trial for James Holmes, what you're talking about there, where he went to this movie theater on purpose, perhaps alluding to some premeditation in this case.
Well, we know he cased the movie theaters before he picked the one that he did. And, in the Connecticut attack, which you've been asking about, it turns out this killer had a spreadsheet that was 4 feet by 7 feet, where he had written down all the past multiple victim public shootings and the amount of media coverage that they got, apparently showing to himself that the more people he could kill, the more news mentions he would get as a result of that. And that he wanted to outdo the killer in Norway, which holds by far the record. He killed, just with his gun, not including the bombing deaths, he killed 69 people and wounded 110 others with his guns that he had, primarily handguns. And, it's hard to get over this. I mean, I could go through lots of cases from Columbine on where it's pretty clear that these guys cared about attacking a place where victims weren't able to go and defend themselves. You look at the mall shootings, you look at others. Out of all the places they can go, they keep on picking just those few places where victims aren't allowed to defend themselves.
And that's a point that does often get overlooked in the media reporting of all this. I also want to talk real quickly, a last question about some polling data. You see broad support for increased background checks for private sales and gun show sales, but at the same time, a lot of these same data samples show that people who favor this legislation think it won't do much good to prevent these types of mass shootings, the shootings we talked about, Sandy Hook, Aurora, Colorado, and so on. So why does the public support these stricter gun laws, even though they believe they won't do much good?
Well, I think support generally has been falling for these stricter gun laws. Look, if people want more in depth, they can go to At the Brink. I kind of go through these specific laws that we're going through because we only have a minute left. But, you look at the academic research, and people don't find any benefits from these background checks. It's not stopping criminals. It's not stopping others from going and getting guns. Unfortunately, what they end up doing, because of all the massive false positives that you have with these things, is that 95+% of the people who are stopped are law-abiding citizens who, for months, find that they can't purchase a gun. And maybe for the vast majority of those, that's simply an inconvenience. But when you're talking about such a large number of people, you end up with a significant number of people who need guns for self-defense who can't get it.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, John Lott Jr. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks for having me on.